Sometimes it takes a child to save more than just a life. Sometimes it takes a moment of pure terror to remind us that we're not meant to face this world alone. 68-year-old Eli Zook had been working his Ohio farm by himself for 20 years. His wife Sarah was gone, his children scattered, and his heart carried wounds that never seemed to heal. The borrowed tractor felt wrong beneath his hands that morning, but his aging body couldn't handle the old ways anymore. When the machine started to tip, when 2 tons of steel began rolling toward him, Eli thought his time had come. But it was 8-year-old Willa who pulled him free, a little girl who wasn't even supposed to be there. What happens when a child's courage changes everything for a lonely old man? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning dew still clung to the grass when Eli Zook stepped onto his front porch, the wooden boards creaking beneath his work boots with the familiar sound of 2 decades. His weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of black coffee. No sugar, no cream, the same way he'd taken it since Sarah passed. Some habits, he'd learned, were harder to break than others. From where he stood, Eli could see the entire spread of his 120-acre farm stretching toward the horizon. Rolling fields of corn and soybeans painted the landscape in shades of green that would soon turn golden under the Ohio sun. It was good land, fertile and forgiving, the kind his grandfather had dreamed of when he'd first come to this valley in 1952. 3 generations of Zooks had worked this soil, and Eli took pride in knowing every stone, every slope, every patch, where the earth turned stubborn after heavy rain. But this morning something felt different. Maybe it was the way the borrowed tractor sat hulking near the barn, its red paint too bright against the weathered wood and familiar grays of his equipment. Maybe it was the ache in his lower back that seemed to worsen each season, reminding him that his body wasn't as willing as his spirit. Or maybe it was the letter that had arrived yesterday still unopened on his kitchen table bearing the Columbus return address he'd memorized but hadn't seen in 3 years. Eli's fingers found the chain around his neck, hidden beneath his plain blue shirt. Sarah's wedding ring hung there, a simple gold band that had become as much a part of him as the calluses on his palms. He'd tried wearing it on his finger for the first few years after she died, but it felt wrong somehow. Too visible. Too much. Like pretending she might walk through the door at any moment, flour dusting her apron and that gentle smile lighting her face. The sound of a screen door slamming pulled him from his thoughts. Across the property line, Tom Henderson was stepping onto his own porch, moving slower than he had even a month ago. Tom was 72, 4 years, Eli's senior, and though they'd been neighbors for nearly 20 years, they'd never been what you'd call close. Pleasant enough, certainly, they helped each other when storms knocked down fence lines or when one of them needed to borrow a tool. But their worlds were different enough that their conversations rarely went beyond weather and crops. This summer, though, Tom had a visitor. Eli watched as a small figure burst through Tom's front door like a bolt of lightning. Wrapped in pink overalls, 8-year-old Willa Henderson, Tom's granddaughter, had arrived 3 weeks ago for what Tom called her summer adventure, though Eli suspected it was more complicated than that. He'd overheard enough phone conversations through the thin evening air to know that Tom's daughter was going through what people politely called a difficult time. Divorce, from what Eli could gather, and she needed Tom to take Willa while she sorted things out. Willa was everything Eli's quiet world was not. She was perpetual motion, endless questions, laughter that carried across the fields like birdsong. Even from a distance, he could see her pointing at something in Tom's garden, her curly brown hair catching the morning light as she bounced on her toes. She reminded Eli of someone, though he couldn't quite place who. "Grandpa Tom, can I go see the horses?" Her voice carried clearly across the yards. "Those aren't horses, sweetheart," Tom's gruff voice replied. though Eli could hear the affection in it. "Those are Mr. Zook's draft horses, and they're working animals. We don't bother working animals." Eli's gaze shifted to his own barn, where Samson and Delilah stood in the paddock. The two Clydesdales were getting on in years. Samson was 19. Delilah 17, but they were still the finest team in the county. They'd been Sarah's favorites, and she'd named them with a sense of humor that always made Eli shake his head. "Every great love story needs a little drama," she'd said when they'd brought the foals home. The horses lifted their massive heads as if they knew they were being discussed, and Samson let out a soft whinny that made Willa clap her hands in delight. "They know I'm here," she exclaimed. Tom's low chuckle reached Eli's ears. Animals are smart that way. They can tell when someone has a good heart. Eli turned away from the scene, uncomfortable with the warmth it stirred in his chest. He had work to do, and sentiment wouldn't get the south field cultivated. The borrowed tractor waited for him, a necessary concession to the reality of aging. His own equipment, the kind that had served him faithfully for decades, required strength he wasn't sure he still possessed. The John Deere belonged to his neighbor 3 farms over, a kind gesture from a man who understood that pride sometimes had to bend to practicality. He'd put off using it for 2 weeks, finding excuses to work other fields, tend other tasks. But the south field couldn't wait much longer. The soil was perfect after yesterday's rain, and if he delayed, he'd lose the window. Eli drained his coffee and walked toward the barn, his boots leaving prints in the soft earth. Inside, the familiar smells of hay and leather welcomed him since. That connected him to his father and grandfather, to all the mornings they'd started this same way. His hand-carved walking stick leaned against the wall near the door, a piece his father had made in the last year of his life. Heinrich Zook had spent hours in the workshop that final winter, his arthritic fingers still sure with the tools, creating something that would outlast him. A man needs something to lean on, his father had said when he'd presented it. But only when the walking gets hard. Eli had barely used it. Some pride ran too deep to surrender easily. He harnessed Samson and Delilah with practiced movements, their massive bodies patient and familiar under his touch. These morning rituals grounded him, reminded him of who he was beneath the accumulated years of grief and solitude. He was a farmer, like his father before him and his father before him. The land understood him in ways people no longer seemed to. But as he led the horses toward the borrowed tractor, he felt the weight of change pressing against his shoulders. Change had taken Sarah. Change had scattered his children to distant cities where they built lives he didn't understand. Change had brought modern equipment into his barn and turned his hands to machines instead of reins and leather. "Morning, Eli." He turned to find Tom walking along the fence line that separated their properties, Willa skipping beside him like a lamb in spring. "Tom," Eli nodded, his voice rusty from the morning quiet. "That's quite a machine you've got there," Tom observed, gesturing toward the tractor. "Jim Morrison loaned it to you?" "For the week," Eli confirmed. Seemed foolish to turn down the help. Willa had wandered closer to the fence, her small hands gripping the wooden rails as she stared up at him with eyes that seemed far too knowing for someone her age. They were brown, flecked with gold, and they reminded him of someone he couldn't. "Quite place. Are you Mr. Zook?" she asked directly, ignoring the subtle adult conversation happening above her head. "I am," Eli replied, surprised by the question's directness. "Grandpa Tom says you've lived here forever and ever. Is that true?" Tom cleared his throat. "Willa, we've talked about being polite to neighbors." "It's all right," Eli said, though he wasn't entirely sure it was. 46 years on this particular farm, but my family's been in this valley much longer. Do you have any children?" The question hit like a stone dropped in still water. "Willa," Tom began, but Eli raised a hand. "I do," he said simply. They live far away now. That's sad, Willa said with the matter-of-fact honesty that only children could manage. Don't you miss them? The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Eli felt something crack inside his chest, some carefully maintained wall that had kept these questions at bay for years. Every day, he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. Tom's weathered face softened with understanding. Come on, sweetheart, he said to Willa. Let's let Mr. Zook get to his work. But Willa didn't move. Her gaze remained fixed on Eli's face, as if she were reading something written there in lines only she could see. My mommy lives far away too, she said quietly. But she'd come back. Maybe your children will too. Before either man could respond, she turned and skipped back toward Tom's house, leaving her words hanging in the morning air like dandelion seeds waiting for the wind. Eli watched her go, something shifting inside him that he didn't quite understand. Tom lingered at the fence for a moment, studying Eli's face. She's got her grandmother's heart, Tom said finally. Sees things the rest of us miss? After Tom walked away, Eli stood alone with his thoughts and the borrowed tractor. The machine loomed larger than it had moments before, foreign and complicated in ways that had nothing to do with mechanics. But the south field waited, and the morning was getting away from him. He climbed onto the tractor seat, his body protesting the unfamiliar angle, and started the engine. The roar was louder than his horse's gentle breathing, more urgent than the whisper of wind through corn. As he drove toward the field, he found himself thinking about Willa's question, about children who lived far away and the fathers who missed them every day. The south field stretched before him, rich earth ready for cultivation. But for the first time in 20 years, Eli's mind wasn't entirely on the work. Instead, he kept thinking about small hands gripping fence rails and eyes that saw too much, and the uncomfortable realization that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he'd convinced himself to be. The accident happened so fast that Eli's mind couldn't quite process it in real time. One moment he was guiding the borrowed tractor along the gentle slope of the south field, watching the cultivator blades turn the rich soil in neat parallel furrows. The next, the ground beneath the right wheels gave way, softened by yesterday's rain and an underground spring he'd forgotten about, and the massive machine began its inevitable roll. Time moved like honey in winter. Eli felt the tractor tip beyond the point of recovery, felt his stomach drop as gravity claimed the 2-ton machine. The steering wheel spun uselessly in his hands, and he had just enough time to think about Sarah, about how she'd always worried, about him working alone, before the world turned sideways. But instead of the crushing weight of metal and the darkness he'd expected, Eli felt small, determined hands grip his arm and pull with surprising strength. The pain in his shoulder as his body twisted told him he was still alive, still breathing, still capable of feeling the soft grass beneath his back as he rolled clear of the tractor's path. The machine crashed with a sound like thunder, settling onto its side with a final metallic groan that seemed to echo across the valley. Steam rose from somewhere in its mechanical innards, and the smell of diesel fuel mixed with turned earth filled the air. Eli lay still for a moment, his heart hammering against his ribs, his breath coming in short gasps. Above him, the morning sky was impossibly blue, dotted with clouds that moved with the same unhurried pace they always had, as if the world hadn't just shifted on its axis. Mr. Zook, are you hurt?" The voice belonged to Willa, though it sounded different now, higher, more urgent. Eli turned his head and saw her kneeling beside him, her small face pale with worry, her pink overalls stained with dirt and grass. "Willa," he managed, his voice hoarse with shock. How did you? "I was watching you work," she said, her words tumbling over each other, "from the fence. And I saw the tractor start to tip, and you were going to get squished. So I ran as fast as I could and grabbed you." She paused, her brown eyes wide with the magnitude of what had just happened. "Are you okay? Should I get Grandpa, Tom?" Eli pushed himself up to sitting, his body protesting but functional. Nothing felt broken, though his left shoulder ached where Willa had pulled him. He looked at the overturned tractor, then at the little girl who had somehow appeared at exactly the right moment, and felt something profound shift in his understanding of the world. "You saved my life," he said, the words barely above a whisper. Willa nodded seriously. "I couldn't let you get hurt. You're nice, and you miss your children, and that's sad enough already." Before Eli could respond, he heard Tom's voice calling across the field. "Willa, where are you?" "Over here, Grandpa Tom," she called back, waving her arms. "Mr. Zook had an accident, but he's okay." Tom appeared at the crest of the small hill, moving faster than Eli had seen him move in months. His face was flushed with exertion and worry, and when he saw the overturned tractor, his expression shifted to something close to panic. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Tom breathed, hurrying down the slope. "Eli, are you hurt? Should I call an ambulance?" "I'm all right," Eli said, accepting Tom's helping hand to stand. His legs felt unsteady, but they held him. "Thanks to your granddaughter here." Tom looked between Eli and Willa, his eyes taking in the scene. The overturned tractor, the disturbed earth, his granddaughter's dirt-stained clothes. "She pulled you clear?" he asked, disbelief coloring his voice. "I saw it happening," Willa explained earnestly. "The big tractor was going to fall on him, so I ran really fast and pulled him away. Like in the movies, when someone saves someone." Tom knelt down to Willa's level, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Sweetheart, you could have been hurt. That machine weighs more than a car. If it had rolled the other way, but it didn't," Willa said simply. "And Mr. Zook is safe." Eli found himself studying the child with new eyes. She couldn't weigh more than 60 pounds soaking wet, and yet she acted without hesitation, without thought for her own safety. The kind of courage that came from somewhere deeper than training or experience. "We need to call Jim Morrison," Tom said, gesturing toward the tractor. "Let him know what happened. And probably get Buck's wrecker service out here to write that machine." Eli nodded, but his attention remained on Willa. She was examining a scraped elbow she'd acquired during the rescue, prodding at it with the scientific interest that children brought to their minor injuries. "Does it hurt?" he asked. She looked up at him and shrugged. "A little, but it's okay. Battle wounds are kinda cool." Despite everything, the shock, the near-death experience, the borrowed tractor now lying on its side like a beached whale, Eli found himself smiling. Actually smiling for the first time in longer than he cared to remember. "Battle wounds," he repeated. "That's what my dad calls them when I get hurt doing something brave," Willa explained. "He says they're proof that you tried to do something important." The mention of her father sobered the moment slightly. Eli remembered Tom's phone conversations, the divorce proceedings, the complicated reasons why an 8-year-old was spending her summer with a grandfather instead of her parents. "Your father sounds like a wise man," Eli said carefully. "He is," Willa agreed. "He's just sad right now, like you are. But sadness doesn't last forever. That's what Grandma Henderson used to say." Tom's eyes misted at the mention of his late wife, and Eli felt an unexpected kinship with his neighbor. They were both widowers, both carrying the weight of love that had nowhere to go. "We should head back to the house," Tom said. "Get you cleaned up and call about the tractor. You're welcome to use my phone." As they walked across the field, Tom and Eli moving with the careful pace of men who had felt their mortality brush against them. Willa skipping ahead like nothing extraordinary had happened. Eli found himself wrestling with emotions he hadn't experienced in years. Gratitude, certainly, but something deeper than that. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. "Willa," he called. She turned back to them, walking backward with the effortless balance of childhood. "Thank you," he said simply. She beamed at him, a smile that seemed to light up the morning. You're welcome, Mr. Zook. That's what neighbors do, right? They help each other. Neighbors. The word carried weight that Eli hadn't considered before. He'd lived next to Tom for 20 years, but they'd been polite strangers sharing a property line. Now, bound together by a moment of crisis and a child's courage, something had changed between them. As they reached Tom's back porch, Eli realized he was facing a choice he hadn't anticipated. He could thank them properly, retreat to his house, and return to the familiar patterns of solitude that had sustained him for 2 decades. Or he could step through the door Tom was holding open, accept the offered chair at the kitchen table, and begin to remember what it felt like to be part of something larger than his own. Carefully maintained grief, Willa settled the matter by taking his hand in her small, dirty one. Come on, Mr. Zook, she said, with the natural authority that some children possessed. Grandpa Tom makes really good coffee, and I want to show you my drawings of your horses. And so, for the first time in 20 years, Eli Zook found himself sitting at a neighbor's kitchen table, drinking coffee that wasn't his own, and listening to an 8-year-old girl chatter about draft horses and battle wounds and the surprising ways that people could save each other. The tractor manual lay forgotten in the grass beside the overturned machine, its pages fluttering in the morning breeze like prayers offered to a sky that had, for once, been listening. The friendship bracelet appeared on Eli's fence post 3 days after the accident, tied with the careful determination of small fingers that had worked harder than they needed to. It was a riot of colors: hot pink, electric blue, sunshine yellow, braided together in a pattern that spoke of patience and genuine affection. A small piece of paper was tucked beneath it, secured with a clothespin that must have come from Tom's laundry line. For Mr. Zook, the note read in careful block letters, because heroes need friendship bracelets too. From Willa. Eli stood at his kitchen window, holding the bracelet and studying the note for the 3rd time that morning. The colors seemed impossibly bright against his weathered palm, a splash of joy in the muted tones of his daily life. He'd found gifts, before casseroles from church ladies after Sarah's funeral, anonymous offerings left by neighbors who meant well but didn't know how to bridge the gap his grief had created. But this was different. This was personal in a way that made his chest tight with unfamiliar emotion. Through the window, he could see Willa in Tom's backyard, hanging upside down from the old oak tree's lowest branch, her curls dangling toward the ground as she chattered to Tom's ancient tabby cat. She'd been watching for him, he realized, waiting to see if he'd find her gift. Their eyes met across the yards, and she waved with the enthusiasm of someone who had never learned that friendships required careful navigation. Eli found himself waving back before his cautious nature could intervene. 10 minutes later, she was at his back door, Tom trailing behind with the resigned expression of a man who had learned that his granddaughter's curiosity was a force of nature. "Did you like it?" she asked without preamble, bouncing on her toes as she peered through the screen door. "The bracelet? I made it special for you. The yellow is like corn, and the blue is like the sky, and the pink is because everyone needs some pink in their life, even if they don't know it yet." Eli looked down at the bracelet, still clutched in his hand. "It's very nice," he said, though the words felt inadequate. "Thank you." "You're supposed to wear it," Willa informed him seriously. "That's how friendship bracelets work. When you wear it, you remember that someone cares about you, even when they're not there." The simplicity of it, the clear, uncomplicated logic of a child's affection left Eli temporarily speechless. Tom cleared his throat from behind his granddaughter. "We don't want to bother you, Eli," he said. "Willa just wanted to make sure you were feeling all right after the other day." "I'm fine," Eli replied automatically, then caught himself. "Actually, I've been meaning to thank you both properly for what you did. If Willa hadn't been there, but I was there, Willa interrupted with the matter-of-fact confidence that seemed to be her default setting. And now we're friends, right? That's how it works when someone saves someone. They become friends automatically. Eli found himself smiling despite his discomfort with the attention. Is that so? Absolutely. It's a rule. She paused, studying his face with those two knowing brown eyes. Have you ever had a friend who was a kid before? The question caught him off guard. Had he? He thought about Jacob and Rebecca when they were small, but that was different. They were his children, not his friends. There had been neighbor children over the years, but always at a polite distance, always filtered through their parents. Caution around the quiet Amish widower who kept to himself. No, he said honestly. I don't think I have. Willa's face lit up as if he'd given her a wonderful gift. Then I get to be your first kid friend. That's special, right, Grandpa Tom? Tom's weathered face softened as he looked at his granddaughter. Very special, sweetheart. Can I see your farm? Willa asked, the words tumbling out with barely contained excitement. I mean, really see it? Not just from the fence? Grandpa Tom says you have the most beautiful horses in the whole county, and chickens, and maybe even a barn cat? Eli looked at Tom, who shrugged apologetically. She's been asking since the day she arrived. I told her it wasn't polite to invite yourself places, but this is different because we're friends now. Willa finished confidently. And somehow, standing there with a child's handmade bracelet in his palm and her eager face looking up at him through the screen door, Eli found himself nodding. I suppose it wouldn't hurt to show you around, he said, surprising himself with the decision. Willa let out a whoop of joy that sent Tom's cat scurrying for cover and brought a genuine laugh from Eli's throat, the first he'd heard from himself in longer than he cared to remember. The tour began at the barn, where Samson and Delilah greeted their visitors with the gentle curiosity that draft horses seem to reserve for children. Willa approached them with the fearless wonder of someone who had never learned that massive animals might be dangerous, reaching up to stroke Samson's velvet nose while chattering a constant stream of observations and questions. Why are they so big? Do they eat a lot? What are their favorite foods? Do they have friends? Are they married like people get married? Eli found himself answering each question with more patience than he'd shown anyone in years, watching Willa's face light up with each new piece of information. When he mentioned that the horses had been Sarah's favorites, Willa's expression turned serious. Sarah was your wife who went to heaven. The direct question should have been painful, should have sent him retreating behind the walls he'd built so carefully. Instead, he found himself nodding. She was. She loved these two more than they deserved. I bet they miss her too, Willa said solemnly, then brightened. But now they have us to visit them, so they won't be lonely anymore. Yes, the casual inclusion in that single word hit Eli with unexpected force. When had he become part of an us again? They moved on to the chickens, where Willa delighted in collecting eggs and naming each hen based on their personalities. That one's definitely a Martha, and that grumpy one over there is absolutely a Bertha. The barn cat, a one-eyed Tom named Moses, emerged from his hiding spot to weave around Willa's legs, purring with the shameless enthusiasm reserved for people who understood that cats were, in fact, the center of the universe. He likes me, Willa announced unnecessarily, as Moses had clearly fallen under her spell completely. Animals know good people, Eli said, echoing Tom's words from days earlier. That's what Grandpa Tom always says. He says I have my grandma's way with animals. Her face clouded slightly. I wish I could have met her. Grandpa Tom says she would have loved me a lot. I'm sure she would have, Eli said gently. Just like Sarah would have loved you. The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise Tom, who had been following their conversation with careful attention. But they felt true in a way that settled something in Eli's chest as the afternoon wore on. Eli found himself sharing stories he hadn't told in years about the farm's history, about his father's woodworking, about the seasons and cycles that governed this life he built. Willa absorbed every word with the intensity of someone collecting treasures, asking follow-up questions that showed she was truly listening. When Tom finally called them in for supper, Eli realized he'd spent the entire afternoon talking to another person without once checking his pocket watch or thinking about tasks left undone. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Willa asked as they walked toward Tom's house. "I want to help with the chickens, and Moses definitely needs more attention." Eli looked at the friendship bracelet, now tied around his wrist where Willa had insisted. It belonged. The bright colors caught the evening light, bold and cheerful against his work-worn skin. "I suppose that would be all right," he said. Willa's smile could have powered the entire county. The recipe box sat on Eli's kitchen counter like an accusation, its faded blue paint and hand-painted flowers a reminder of celebrations he'd stopped acknowledging years ago. Sarah had used it daily, her careful handwriting filling index cards with measurements and instructions passed down through generations of church ladies and family gatherings. After she died, Eli had packed it away in the bedroom closet, unable to bear the sight of her careful script detailing the foods that had filled their home with warmth. Now, Willa stood before it, her small hands tracing the painted daisies with reverent curiosity. "These are all your wife's recipes?" she asked, her voice hushed as if she were in a library or a church. "They are." Eli's throat felt tight. He shouldn't have left the box out, shouldn't have been looking through it that morning when the loneliness felt particularly sharp. But Willa had arrived for her daily visit, and there was no hiding it now. "Today's your birthday, isn't it?" Willa said, not really asking. "Grandpa Tom told me. He said you don't celebrate anymore, but that seems silly to me." Eli blinked, surprised by her directness. "It's just another day." "No, it's not." Willa opened the recipe box with the careful reverence she might have shown a jewelry box. "Birthdays are special because they're the day you came into the world, and that made everyone who loves you happy. Even if some of those people aren't here anymore, the happiness still counts." She pulled out a card at random, Sarah's recipe for apple cake, written in the careful script that had once planned every meal, every celebration. Eli remembered that cake, remembered Sarah making it every September when the apples were perfect, remembered the way the house would smell like cinnamon and home. "Can we make this?" Willa asked, holding up the card. "For your birthday? I bet your wife would be happy if we used her recipe to make something special for you." The suggestion hit Eli like a physical blow. The kitchen hadn't seen baking since Sarah died. The measuring cup sat unused. The mixing bowls gathered dust. The old stand mixer had been relegated to a cabinet where he wouldn't have to see it and remember Sunday mornings when Sarah would hum while she worked. "I don't think," he began. "Please?" Willa's eyes held an earnestness that was hard to resist. "I'm a really good helper. My mom taught me how to crack eggs without getting shells in the bowl, and I can measure things if you show me how much. It would be like having your wife help us, in a way." The logic was 8-year-old logic, simple and pure and devastating in its honesty. Eli found himself nodding before his practical mind could object. 2 hours later, his kitchen looked like a battlefield. Flour dusted every surface. Eggshells had somehow found their way to the floor despite Willa's claims of expertise. And there was cinnamon in places cinnamon had no business being. But the smell filled the house with memories so vivid that Eli had to sit down at the kitchen table and breathe carefully. "It smells just like love, doesn't it?" Willa said, peering through the oven window at their creation. She had flour in her hair and apple pieces stuck to her overalls, and she looked absolutely delighted with the chaos they'd created. "Yes," Eli said quietly, "it does." While the cake baked, Willa explored the kitchen with the thoroughness of an archaeologist, asking about every tool, every dish, every photograph on the windowsill. She found the small frame picture of Jacob and Rebecca when they were children 8 and 6, grinning gap-toothed smiles at the camera during some long-ago summer. "These are your kids?" she asked, studying the photo with interest. "They are. They're adults now. What are their names?" "Jacob and Rebecca. Jacob's 38 now, Rebecca's 36. Do they look like you or like your wife?" Eli took the photo from her, studying faces he knew by heart. "Rebecca has Sarah's eyes. Jacob has my stubborn chin. Are they nice?" The simple question opened a well of complicated emotions. "They're good people," Eli said carefully. "Jacob's a teacher in Columbus. He has 2 children of his own, my grandchildren. Rebecca lives in California. She's a nurse." "That's far away," Willa observed. "Do you miss them?" "Every day." "Why don't they visit?" Eli set the photo down, his hands suddenly unsteady. How to explain 20 years of accumulated distance, of pride and grief, and the way loss could make a person push away the very people they needed most? "Sometimes," he said slowly, "when people are hurting, they don't know how to be close to each other anymore. They want to, but they forget how." Willa considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "That's sad," she said finally. "But it's not too late to remember, is it? People can learn things again if they really want to." Before Eli could answer, the timer chimed, and Willa rushed to the oven with the excitement of someone witnessing a miracle. The cake had risen perfectly, golden brown and fragrant, exactly the way Sarah's always had. "It's beautiful," Willa exclaimed. "Your wife would be so proud." As they waited for the cake to cool, Willa helped Eli clean the kitchen, chattering about everything and nothing. She told him about her parents' divorce, with the matter-of-fact acceptance that children sometimes showed toward adult failures. She talked about her mother's sadness, her father's new apartment, her hope that they might find their way back to each other. "Sometimes people need time apart to remember how much they love each other," she said, unconsciously echoing wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. When Tom arrived for supper, an invitation that had become natural over the past week, they presented the cake with the ceremony it deserved. 3 people around Eli's kitchen table, sharing food and stories, and the kind of easy companionship he'd forgotten was possible. "Make a wish," Willa instructed as Tom lit the single candle she'd insisted they needed. Eli looked around the table at Tom's weathered face, kind and patient, at Willa's bright eyes, full of life and possibility, at his kitchen, warm with laughter and the lingering smell of Sarah's apple cake. For the first time in 20 years, he had something to wish for. He closed his eyes and wished for courage. Courage to bridge the distances he'd created. Courage to reach across the years of silence. Courage to be the father his children deserved rather than the ghost he'd become. When he opened his eyes, Willa was beaming at him as if she could read his thoughts. "Good wishes come true," she said confidently. "Especially birthday wishes. They're extra strong." As they ate Sarah's cake in the gathering dusk, Eli found himself believing her. The letter had been sitting unopened on Eli's kitchen table for over a week now, its Columbus return address like a weight pressing against his conscience every time he passed by. Jacob's handwriting on the envelope, still recognizable after all these years, though more mature now, the careful script of a teacher who spent his days shaping young minds. Willa found it during her afternoon visit, her curiosity as natural as breathing. "Is this from your son?" she asked, picking up the envelope with the careful reverence she showed toward anything that seemed important. Eli's hand stilled on the harness he was mending. "Yes. Aren't you going to read it?" The simple question carried no judgment, just genuine puzzlement. In Willa's world, letters from family were treasures to be opened immediately. devoured with excitement, and shared with anyone who would listen. "I will," Eli said, though they both knew it wasn't true. Willa set the letter down gently and climbed onto the chair beside him, her small presence suddenly enormous in the quiet kitchen. "Are you scared of what it says?" The directness of the question took his breath away. 8-year-olds, he was learning, had a gift for cutting straight to the heart of things that adults spent years dancing around. "Yes," he admitted. "What's the worst thing it could say?" Eli considered this, his hands continuing their automatic work on the leather straps. "That he doesn't want to see me. That too much time has passed. That I've been such a poor father that he's better off without me." Willa was quiet for a long moment, processing this with the seriousness she brought to all weighty matters. "And what's the best thing it could say? That he misses me. That he wants his children to know their grandfather. That there might still be time to fix what I broke." "So there are good possibilities and bad possibilities," Willa said, her logic as clear as morning light. "But right now, with the letter not opened, you have all the bad possibilities and none of the good ones." "That seems silly to me." She said it without judgment, just observation, but it hit Eli like a physical blow. How long had he been living in the worst-case scenarios, denying himself even the possibility of hope? "Would you like me to read it too?" "You?" Willa offered. Sometimes scary things are less scary when someone else reads them first. Eli looked at her, this small girl who had somehow become the bravest person he knew, and felt something shift in his chest. "Would you?" Willa nodded solemnly and picked up the letter, opening it with the careful precision of someone who understood the weight of the moment. Her lips moved silently as she read, her expression cycling through surprise, sadness, and something that looked like hope. "It's not scary at all," she said finally, looking up at him with eyes that seemed far too wise for her age. "It's actually really nice. Do you want me to read it out loud?" Eli nodded, not trusting his voice. "Dear Dad," Willa began, her clear voice giving weight to words that had waited weeks to be heard. "I hope this letter finds you well. I've been thinking about you more lately, especially since Jenny, that's his wife, I think, had her birthday last month. The kids asked about their grandfather, and I realized how little I've told them about you, about the farm, about the way you taught me to work with my hands and find peace in simple things." Willa paused, looking up at Eli's face. "He misses you," she said softly. "That's good, right?" Eli nodded, his throat too tight for words. She continued reading. "I know we hadn't spoken in too long. I know there were things said after Mom died, hurt feelings that seemed too big to bridge. But time has a way of putting things in perspective. I'm a father now, and I understand things I didn't then, about grief, about the way loss can make. US say things we don't mean, do things that push away the people we love most." "See?" Willa said, interrupting her reading. "He understands now. Grown-ups sometimes need time to understand things that kids already know." "Keep reading," Eli managed. "The kids are 7 and 9 now, Emma and Samuel. Emma has Mom's gentle way with animals, and Samuel has your gift for building things. They're curious about their Amish grandfather, about the farm, about whether you still have those giant horses Mom used to talk about. I'd like to bring them to visit if you'd welcome us. I know it won't erase the years between us, but maybe it could be a start." Willa set the letter down and looked at Eli expectantly. "That's not scary at all. That's wonderful. He wants to come visit, and he wants you to meet your grandchildren. Why were you afraid of that?" Eli wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, not caring that Willa saw the tears. "Because I was afraid I'd lost them forever. Because I was afraid I didn't deserve a second chance." "That's silly," Willa said with the absolute confidence that only children possessed. "Everyone deserves second chances. That's how families work. They forgive each other and try again." She climbed down from her chair and went to the kitchen drawer where Eli kept his writing materials, a discovery she'd made during one of her thorough explorations of his house. "You should write back right now," she announced, pulling out paper and a pen. "Before you get scared again. I'll help you think of what to say." "Willa, I don't know. Dear Jacob," she began, as if his protest hadn't happened. "I got your letter, and it made me very happy. I would love to meet Emma and Samuel. And yes, Samson and Delilah are still here, and they're still the most beautiful. Horses in the county. Please come visit as soon as you can. Love, Dad." She looked up at him triumphantly. "See? It's easy. You just have to say what's true." Eli stared at her for a long moment. This little girl who had somehow become his teacher in the art of courage. Then he picked up the pen and began to write, following her template but adding his own words, his own tentative hope. When he finished, Willa insisted on walking with him to the mailbox, treating the posting of the letter like the momentous occasion it was. As the envelope disappeared into the rural postal slot, Eli felt something he hadn't experienced in 20 years, anticipation for the future instead of dread. "How long do you think it will take for him to get it?" Willa asked. "A few days, maybe." "And how long until he writes back?" "I don't know. Maybe a week or two." Willa considered this seriously. "That's not very long to wait for your family to come back," she said. "Good things are worth waiting for." As they walked back toward the house, Eli realized that somewhere along the way, without him noticing, hope had begun to take root in the carefully tended soil of his grief. And like all the best crops, it was growing stronger each day. The workshop had been closed for 20 years, its doors sealed not with lock and key, but with grief so profound it had become physical. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light that slanted through grimy windows, illuminating workbenches covered with cloth, tools hanging from their familiar places like sleeping ghosts. Willa stood in the doorway beside Eli, her eyes wide with the wonder of discovery. "It's like a secret room," she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the spirits of all the things that had been made here. "It was my father's workshop," Eli said, his voice rusty with disuse, "and his father's before him. I used to work here too, before your wife died," Willa finished gently. She had an uncanny ability to understand the shapes of loss, perhaps from navigating her own family's fractures. Eli nodded, stepping carefully into the space that had once been his sanctuary. Everything was exactly as he'd left it that terrible spring when Sarah's cancer had finally claimed her. Half-finished projects sat abandoned on the workbenches, a jewelry box he'd been making for Rebecca's birthday, a toy chest meant for grandchildren he'd thought he'd never meet, but it was the rocking chair in the corner that drew Willa's attention like a magnet. "It's beautiful," she breathed, approaching it with the reverence she showed toward anything made by hand. "Did you make this?" "I started to," Eli said quietly. "It was meant to be a gift for Sarah. She'd always wanted a rocking chair for the front porch, said she could picture herself sitting there in the evenings, watching the sun set over the fields." The chair was 3/4 finished, its arms and back carved with the intricate patterns that had been the Zook family signature for 3 generations. Birds in flight, leaves unfurling, vines that seemed to grow from the wood itself. But the seat was unfinished, the final sanding undone, the stain never applied. "Why didn't you finish it?" Willa asked, running her small fingers along the carved armrest. "She died before I could," Eli said simply. "And after that, it seemed pointless." Willa was quiet for a long moment, studying the chair with the intensity she brought to all important problems. "I don't think it's pointless," she said finally. "I think it's waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For you to be ready to finish it. For your heart to be healed enough to make beautiful things again." She said it with such matter-of-fact certainty that Eli almost believed her. Almost. "My grandfather Tom could really use a rocking chair," Willa continued, her tone casual but her eyes watching Eli's face carefully. He sits on that hard porch all the time, and his back hurts, but he's too proud to say so. A nice rocking chair would help him feel better. The suggestion hung in the air between them, innocent and devastating. Eli understood what she was really offering, not just a purpose for the abandoned chair, but a bridge between past and present, a way to honor Sarah's memory by creating something beautiful for someone who needed it. I don't know if I remember. How? He said quietly. Like riding a bicycle, Willa said confidently. Some things your hands never forget. She began exploring the workshop with her characteristic thoroughness, asking about every tool, every piece of wood, every project that lay dormant under dust covers. Her questions awakened memories Eli had buried lessons from his father about. Grain and balance, the satisfaction of seeing raw wood transform under patient hands, the quiet meditation that came from working with materials that had grown from God's earth. This looks like it was going to be a treasure box, Willa said, uncovering the jewelry box meant for Rebecca. It was. For my daughter. She'd probably still like it, Willa observed. Grown-up ladies need jewelry boxes too. Maybe even more than little girls, because they have more special things to keep safe. Her logic was irrefutable, the way children's logic often was. Eli found himself lifting the half-finished box, feeling its weight, testing the smoothness of the wood that had waited 2 decades for completion. "Will you teach me?" Willa asked suddenly. "About woodworking? I want to make something for my mom, for when she comes to pick me up. Something that shows her I understand about making beautiful things when you're sad." The request pierced something deep in Eli's chest. Here was this child, dealing with her own family's brokenness, wanting to create rather than destroy, to build bridges rather than walls. "What would you like to make?" He heard himself asking. Willa's face lit up like sunrise. "A picture frame. For the photo Grandpa Tom keeps of my grandma. He looks at it every night before bed, but it's just sitting on his knitstand getting dusty. It should have a beautiful frame that shows how much he loves her." And so they began. Eli's hands were stiff at first, uncertain after so many years of neglect, but muscle memory proved stronger than doubt. He showed Willa how to select wood, how to feel for the grain, how to measure twice and cut once. Her small fingers were surprisingly deft, her concentration absolute when the work demanded it. As they worked, they talked. Willa told him about her parents' arguments, about the way her mother cried when she thought no one was looking, about her father's new apartment that smelled like sadness and takeout food. In return, Eli found himself sharing memories of Sarah, not the painful ones he'd rehearsed in his grief, but the joyful ones he'd forgotten he possessed. Her laughter when he'd built her a spice rack with all the compartments slightly different sizes. The way she'd insisted on helping, even when her hands were sore from arthritis. Her absolute conviction that anything made with love was perfect, regardless of its flaws. "She sounds like she was wonderful," Willa said, carefully sanding the corner of her picture frame. "She was," Eli agreed. "She would have loved you, and she would have wanted you to finish her rocking chair," Willa said, with the gentle certainty that had become her trademark. As the afternoon faded into evening, they covered their projects with cloth and swept the sawdust from the floor. The workshop felt different now, not like a tomb, but like a place waiting to be alive again. "Tomorrow we'll work on the rocking chair," Willa announced as they walked back toward the house. "Grandpa Tom's birthday is next week, and I want to surprise him." Eli looked back at the workshop, its windows golden with sunset, and felt something he'd thought was dead, forever beginning to stir. Purpose, joy, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with his hands and heart. "Tomorrow," he agreed, and meant it. The hospital discharge papers lay scattered across Tom's kitchen table like leaves after a storm, their medical terminology foreign and frightening in the stark fluorescent light. Eli read them twice, his weathered hands trembling slightly as the implications settled into his consciousness. Myocardial infarction, arterial blockage, medication regimen, follow-up appointments, heart attack. Tom sat in his recliner, looking smaller than Eli had ever seen him. Oxygen tubes snaking around his ears and disappearing into the portable tank beside his chair. The attack had come without warning. One moment he'd been watching Willa chase butterflies in the backyard. The next he was clutching his chest and calling her name with a voice that barely carried across the yard. It was Willa who had called. 911. Her 8-year-old voice steady and clear as she gave the dispatcher their address and described what was happening. It was Willa who had held Tom's hand in the ambulance, chattering about everything and nothing to keep him conscious and calm. And it was Willa who had called her mother from the hospital, her small voice finally breaking as she tried to explain why everything was falling apart. Now, 3 days later, Angela Morrison sat across from them at the kitchen table, her face drawn with exhaustion and worry. She'd driven straight through from Chicago, abandoning the life she'd been trying to rebuild, to rush to her father's bedside. The resemblance to Willa was striking. The same brown eyes, the same determined chin, though Angela's eyes held shadows that childhood hadn't yet taught her daughter to carry. The doctors say he needs full-time care for at least the next few weeks, Angela said, her voice carefully controlled. Someone to monitor his medications, help with daily activities, watch for signs of another episode. I can do that, Willa piped up from her position on the floor beside Tom's chair, where she barely left his side since coming home from the hospital. I can take care of Grandpa Tom. I know how to make his coffee and find his pills and everything. Angela's face softened as she looked at her daughter. Sweetheart, that's not something a little girl should have to do. Taking care of sick people is a grown-up job. But I don't want to leave him, Willa said, her voice small but fierce. He needs me, and Mr. Zook needs me too. We're working on important projects together. Eli felt his chest tighten at the mention of his name. Over the past few weeks, he'd allowed himself to forget that this was temporary, that summer would end, that Willa belonged to a life beyond these fields and this quiet valley. The reminder hit him like a physical blow. I know you don't want to leave, baby, Angela said gently. But school starts in 2 weeks, and I need to be here to take care of Grandpa. There's no one to watch you in Chicago while I'm driving back and forth. Can't I just stay here? Willa asked, desperation creeping into her voice. I could go to school here and help take care of Grandpa Tom and visit Mr. Zook every day. Please, Mom? Angela looked at her father, propped up in his chair with tubes and monitors, then at Eli, who was sitting quietly in the corner, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. In the space of 3 days, his world had shifted again first. With Tom's attack, now with the realization that he was about to lose the 2 people who had become his anchor to hope. It's not that simple, Willa, Angela said finally. I have a job in Chicago and an apartment, and you have school and friends there. I don't have friends there, Willa said quietly. Not real ones, not like Mr. Zook. The words hung in the air, honest and devastating. Eli saw Angela's face crumple slightly before she recovered her composure. What about your father? Angela asked, changing the subject. He should know what's happening. He can help with. David's in San Francisco this month, Tom said, speaking for the first time since they'd started discussing Willa's future. His voice was weaker than before, but still carried the gentle authority that had guided his family for 7 decades. New job. Won't be back until September. Angela closed her eyes, the weight of single parenthood and family crisis pressing down on her shoulders. I can't do this alone, she whispered. You're not alone, Eli said quietly, surprising himself with the words. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward him, and he felt heat rise in his cheeks. I mean, if there's anything I can do to help. With Tong's care or He paused, looking at Willa's hopeful face. "I know I'm not family, but I've grown quite fond of this little one. If it would help for her to stay a bit longer, Mr. Zook could watch me during the day while you take care of Grandpa Tom," Willa said, her words tumbling over each other in excitement. "And I could help both of you, and we could finish the rocking chair. And maybe his son will write back and want to visit, and everything could work out perfectly." Angela looked between her daughter and the quiet Amish man who had somehow become central to Willa's summer happiness. "Mr. Zook, I appreciate the offer, but I couldn't ask you to take on that responsibility. Willa can be quite a handful." "She's been the best part of my summer," Eli said honestly. "The best part of many years, if I'm being truthful. I'd consider it an honor to help care for her." Tom shifted in his chair, his tired eyes moving between his daughter and his neighbor. "Eli's a good man, Angela. Raised 2 children of his own. And Willa's right, she has been a help to both of us. The school here is good," Willa added helpfully. "I checked. They have a really nice playground and everything." Angela was quiet for a long moment, studying her daughter's face, seeing something there that Eli couldn't interpret. Finally, she spoke. "What about the divorce proceedings? The custody arrangements with your father? What about them?" Willa asked, confused. "Dad wants me to be happy and safe. I'm happy here, and I'm definitely safe with Mr. Zook and Grandpa Tom." The conversation continued for another hour, circling around logistics and legalities, but Eli could see the moment when Angela's resistance began to crumble. It was when Willa climbed into her lap and spoke quietly about the things that mattered to her, not toys or entertainment, but the garden she'd been helping Tom tend, the workshop projects she and Eli were completing, the way Samson and Delilah nickered when they saw her coming. "You really want to stay?" Angela asked her daughter. "More than anything," Willa said solemnly. "This feels like home, Mom. Like the kind of home where people take care of each other and make beautiful things and don't yell about money or who forgot to pick up the dry cleaning." Angela's eyes filled with tears at her daughter's honest assessment of the life they'd been living. "Oh, sweetheart, it doesn't have to be forever," Willa said quickly, sensing her mother's emotion. "Just until Grandpa Tom feels better and you figure out your grown-up stuff. And maybe by then, Mr. Zook's son will visit and you can meet him and see that we're all just one big happy family now." The simplicity of it, the child's faith that love could solve any problem, that families could expand to include whoever needed including, left the adults temporarily speechless. Finally, Tom spoke from his chair, his voice soft but certain. "Let her stay, Angela. Let them both heal each other." And as the summer evening settled around them, filled with the sound of cicadas and the distant lowing of cattle, decisions were made that would change all their lives. Willa would stay through the fall, at least. Angela would divide her time between Chicago and the farm, helping her father recover while building a new relationship with the daughter she was finally ready to see clearly. And Eli would have more time to finish learning how to live again. Guided by the wisdom of a child who believed that every story could have a ending if people just loved each other enough to try. The hospital discharge papers were filed away, but the real healing was just beginning. The completed rocking chair sat in Eli's workshop like a prayer made manifest, its surfaces smooth as silk under the late afternoon light. Every curve had been sanded to perfection, every joint fitted with the precision that came from 50 years of working with wood. The carved birds along the armrests seemed ready to take flight, their wings spread in eternal grace, while the intertwined vines that climbed the chair's back spoke of growth, of life continuing despite loss. Willa ran her small fingers along the armrest for the dozenth time that day, her eyes bright with pride and accomplishment. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever helped make," she said, her voice hushed with wonder. "Your grandmother would have loved it," Eli replied, applying the final coat of hand-rubbed oil that would protect the wood for generations. Sarah always said that things made with love carry that love forward, even after the makers are gone. They'd worked on the chair for 2 weeks, ever since Tom's return from the hospital. What had started as a project to keep Willa occupied during her grandfather's recovery had become something deeper, a meditation on healing, on the way broken things could be made whole again through patience and care. Tom was getting stronger. Each day, though the portable oxygen tank remained his constant companion and his energy flagged by mid-afternoon. The doctors were optimistic about his recovery, but it had been clear that his life would be different now, measured and careful in ways that chafed against his independent nature. "When should we give it to him?" Willa asked, stepping back to admire their handiwork. "Tomorrow's Sunday," Eli said. "After church, maybe. When the whole community can see how much his granddaughter loves him." The mention of church brought a flutter of nervousness to Eli's stomach. He'd been attending services regularly for the first time in years, drawn by Willa's insistence that families should worship together and Tom's gentle encouragement. The community had welcomed him back with the quiet grace that characterized their faith, asking no questions about his long absence, simply making room for him in the pew where he'd once sat with Sarah. But tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, Jacob would be there. The letter had arrived 3 days ago, written in the same careful script that had carried Jacob's childhood thoughts and teenage dreams. The response to Eli's own tentative reaching out had been everything he'd hoped for and everything he'd feared warm. Forgiving but careful in the way of people who had been hurt before. "Dear Dad," the letter began, and those 2 words had made Eli's hands shake so badly he'd had to sit down to continue reading. "I was so happy to receive your letter. The kids are excited about meeting their grandfather, and I'll admit I'm nervous and eager in equal measure. Would this Sunday work for a visit? We could come for the afternoon, maybe stay for supper, if that's not too much trouble. And I can't stop talking about the horses you mentioned, and Samuel has been drawing pictures of what he thinks your farm looks like. I hope we can begin to bridge the years between us. Love, Jacob." Love, Jacob. After 20 years of silence, his son had signed a letter with love. Eli had read the letter aloud to Willa, his voice breaking on the last lines. She'd listened with the serious attention she gave to all important matters, then nodded as if the outcome had never been in doubt. "See," she'd said simply, "I told you good wishes come true." Now, as they prepared to surprise Tom with the rocking chair, Eli found his thoughts constantly drifting to the coming reunion. What would he say to Jacob? How did a father apologize? For 20 years of stubborn pride and willful isolation? How did you bridge a gap that wide with words? "You're thinking about your son again," Willa observed with the uncanny intuition that had become her trademark. "Yes. Are you scared? Terrified?" Willa considered this, her small face serious. "When I was scared about my parents getting divorced, my dad told me that being scared means something matters to you. If you didn't care, you wouldn't be afraid." The wisdom of it, the simple, profound truth that came so naturally to children made Eli's chest tight with emotion. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He is. He's just sad right now, like you were before you met me. But sadness doesn't last forever if you let people help you carry it." They spent the rest of the afternoon putting finishing touches on the rocking chair, adding small details that only they would notice. Willa's initials carved discreetly under the left armrest, the date inscribed in tiny numbers on the chairs. Underside, it was their secret signature, proof that love had guided their hands throughout the making dot as evening approached. They carefully moved the chair to Tom's barn, covering it with an old quilt until the presentation tomorrow. Tom, napping in his recliner with Angela reading quietly beside him, remained unaware of the surprise waiting for him. Angela had stayed true to her word, spending half her time at the farm, helping her father recover while maintaining her job in Chicago through remote work and weekend trips. The arrangement wasn't perfect, but it was working, and Eli could see the healing happening in both father and daughter as they relearned how to be family together. "Mr. Zook," Willa said as they walked back toward his house, "will you teach me how to pray tonight?" The request surprised him. "Don't you already know how to pray?" "I know how to ask for things," she said seriously, "but I want to learn how to say thank you for Grandpa Tom getting better, and for you teaching me about woodworking, and for your son coming to visit. I have a lot to be thankful for." That evening, as the sun set over the fields he'd worked for nearly 5 decades, Eli knelt beside his bed, with Willa kneeling beside him, her small hands folded in careful imitation of his own. Together, they gave thanks for healing bodies and healing hearts, for second chances and new beginnings, for the unexpected ways that love could arrive in a person's life. "And please help Mr. Zook not be scared tomorrow," Willa added to her prayer. "Help him remember that his son loves him and wants to be his family again. Amen." "Amen," Eli whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Saturday night passed slowly, filled with restless sleep and dreams of faces he hadn't seen in 20 years. Eli woke before dawn, his nerves jangling like church bells, and found himself walking through his house as if seeing it through a stranger's eyes. Would Jacob remember the kitchen where Sarah had made his favorite cookies? Would he notice the changes, the empty spaces where family photos used to hang, the silence where laughter once filled the rooms? By the time Willa arrived for breakfast, bouncing with excitement about the chair presentation and the afternoon's reunion, Eli had worked himself into a state of quiet panic. "You look like you're going to throw up," she observed cheerfully, settling herself at his kitchen table with the familiarity of months rather than weeks. "I feel like I might," Eli admitted. "That's normal," Willa said sagely. "Important things are supposed to feel scary. If they didn't, they wouldn't be important." She helped him prepare breakfast with the easy competence she developed over their weeks together, chattering about the morning's plans while keeping a careful eye on his emotional state. Her presence grounded him, reminded him that whatever happened with Jacob, he wasn't facing it alone. Church service that morning felt like a blur of familiar hymns and comforting rituals. Eli sat between Tom and Willa, drawing strength from their steady presence while his eyes kept drifting to the packing area visible through the windows. Would Jacob remember the way to the farm? Would he change his mind at the last moment? The service ended with the traditional meal, the community gathering around long tables laden with food prepared by loving hands. Eli barely tasted what he ate. His stomach too nodded with anticipation to appreciate even Mrs. Miller's famous chicken and dumplings. It was during the cleanup that Willa tugged on his sleeve and pointed toward the window. "Is that them?" she whispered. Eli looked where she pointed and felt his heart stop. A blue sedan was pulling into Tom's driveway, and through the windshield, he could see the face he'd been waiting 20 years to see again. Jacob had come home. The sound of Jacob's voice after 20 years of silence hit Eli like a physical blow, familiar and foreign at the same time. Deeper now, seasoned by years and experience, but still carrying the careful cadence that had once asked permission to stay up past bedtime and confessed childhood transgressions with downcast eyes. "Dad?" Eli stood frozen on Tom's front porch, his weathered hands gripping the railing as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. Across the yard, Jacob climbed out of the blue sedan, moving with the same measured deliberation that had characterized him even as a boy. He was taller than Eli remembered, broader through the shoulders, his hair thinning at the temples in a way that spoke of approaching middle age. But his eyes were exactly the same questioning brown that had once looked to Eli for answers about everything from broken toys to broken hearts. Behind Jacob, 2 children tumbled out of the car's back seat with the irrepressible energy of youth contained too long in a small space. Emma, 7 years old, with Sarah's gentle eyes and her mother's auburn hair, clutched a handmade drawing in one small fist. Samuel, 9 and serious-faced, carried a carefully wrapped package that could only be a gift chosen with the solemnity that children brought to important occasions. Willa, who had been watching from the kitchen window, burst through the front door like a small tornado of excitement. "They're here! They're here!" she announced unnecessarily, bouncing on her toes as if the sheer force of her enthusiasm could bridge the awkward distance between father and son. Jacob's attention shifted to Willa, his expression softening with curiosity and something that might have been relief. Here was neutral ground, a child who belonged to neither the past nor the careful present they were trying to navigate. "You must be Willa," he said, his voice gentle in the way that suggested years of practice with young minds. "Your grandfather told me about you when we spoke on the phone." "Are you Mr. Zook's son?" Willa asked with her characteristic directness. "You look like him, but younger and less sad." The observation, delivered with a child's honesty, broke some of the tension that had been building like thunderclouds. Jacob's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I am Jacob," he confirmed. "And these are my children, your temporary neighbors, I suppose." Emma stepped forward shyly, still clutching her drawing. "I made a picture of the horses," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mama said Grandpa Eli has the most beautiful horses in the whole county." Grandpa Eli. The words hit him like an arrow to the chest, sweet and sharp at the same time. He looked at this granddaughter he'd never met, this small person who carried Sarah's gentle spirit in her face, and felt something crack open inside his chest. "I'd very much like to see your drawing," he said, his voice rough with emotion. He couldn't hide. Samuel hung back slightly, studying Eli with the careful assessment that some children brought to new situations. "Dad says you're really good at building things," he said finally. "I like to build things too. Mama says I got it from you." The casual acknowledgement of inherited traits, of family connections that transcended years of separation, left Eli momentarily speechless. These children knew him, had been told stories about him, had been raised to see him as family despite his long absence from their lives. "Perhaps," Eli managed, "you'd like to see my workshop later. If your father thinks that would be all right." Jacob stepped closer, the careful distance between them narrowing by degrees. He paused, seeming to struggle with words that carried the weight of 2 decades. "I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry we let pride and hurt keep us apart, when we should have been family." "No," Eli said quickly, his own voice breaking. "No, son, I'm the one who should apologize. I was the adult. I should have after your mother died. I should have held us together instead of pushing you away." They stood there for a moment, father and son, with years of accumulated regret hanging between them like morning mist. It was Willa who broke the spell, stepping between them with the confidence of someone who had never learned that some bridges were too broken to repair. "This is the part where you hug," she announced matter-of-factly. "In all the movies, when families find each other again, they hug. It's like a rule." And somehow, guided by the wisdom of an 8-year-old girl who believed that love could solve any problem, Jacob stepped forward and wrapped his arms around his father for the first time in 20 years. Eli felt his son's embrace strong and warm and real, and understood that this was what forgiveness felt like. Not the absence of hurt, but the choice to build something new from the pieces of what had been broken. "I missed you," Jacob whispered against his shoulder. "Every day, I missed you." "I missed you too, son," Eli replied, his voice thick with tears he'd held back for 2 decades. "I missed you too." The camera clicked softly as Angela captured the moment 3 generations of Zooks standing together beside the completed rocking chair, with Willa perched on the armrest like she belonged there by right of love rather than blood. The afternoon sun slanted through Tom's backyard, casting long shadows that seemed to embrace The unlikely family gathered around there. Handmade gift. Tom sat in his new rocking chair with the wonder of someone receiving an unexpected miracle. His weathered hands traced the carved birds along the armrests, following the intricate patterns that spoke of hours of patient work and profound affection. "I can't believe you made this," he said for the third time, his voice thick with emotion. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever owned." Willa helped with every step, Eli said, his hand resting gently on the child's shoulder. "She has natural talent with woodworking and with knowing exactly what people need." The afternoon had unfolded like a dream Eli hadn't dared to have. After the initial reunion, the awkwardness had melted away with surprising speed, dissolved by the magic that children brought to complicated situations. Emma had indeed shown him her drawing of Samson and Delilah, rendered with the careful attention to detail that spoke of true observation, while Samuel had presented him with a handmade wooden airplane, crafted in his school's woodshop with the kind of pride that transcended age. "I made the propeller spin," Samuel had explained, demonstrating the mechanism with the serious air of an engineer presenting blueprints. "Dad helped me with the measurements, but I did all the carving myself." The gift had moved Eli nearly to tears. This grandson he'd never met, carrying on the family tradition of working with wood, building things with his hands and heart. Jacob stood beside his father now, watching his children explore Tom's backyard with Willa as their enthusiastic guide. The years of separation seemed to be dissolving with each shared laugh, each easy conversation, each moment of simple family togetherness. "She's remarkable," Jacob said quietly, nodding toward Willa as she demonstrated the proper way to approach Samson and Delilah, Tom's granddaughter. "I can see why she's had such an impact on you. She saved my life," Eli said simply. "And not just from the tractor accident. She reminded me what it felt like to be part of a family again." Jacob was quiet for a moment, watching his daughter stroke Delilah's massive nose, while Willa explained the finer points of horse psychology. "I should have brought them to meet you years ago," he said finally. "I should have swallowed my pride and picked up the phone. We both made mistakes," Eli replied. "What matters is that we're here now." Angela emerged from Tom's kitchen carrying a pitcher of lemonade and wearing the expression of someone who had spent the afternoon witnessing miracles. "Your father's been telling me about the workshop," she said to Jacob, "about the projects you're working on together. It sounds like Willa's found her calling." "She's got good hands," Eli confirmed, "and better instincts. She understands that woodworking is about more than just cutting and sanding. It's about putting love into something that will outlast you." Tom rocked gently in his new chair, the rhythmic motion seeming to ease not just his physical discomfort, but something deeper. "You know," he said, addressing the group gathered around him, "I've been thinking about what Willa said the other day, about how families can grow to include whoever needs including." He looked pointedly at Eli, then at Jacob and his children. "Seems to me we've all been taking care of each other this summer. Seems to me that makes us family, blood or no blood." The observation hung in the air like a blessing, simple and profound. Angela smiled as she poured lemonade for the children, while Jacob found himself studying the man who had become so important to his father's healing. "You're welcome at our table any time," Jacob said to Tom, then turned to include Angela in his invitation. "All of you. Columbus isn't that far away, and the kids would love to have more family to visit. And you're always welcome here," Tom replied. "This old house gets too quiet sometimes. Could use the sound of children's laughter more often." As the afternoon wore on, plans began to form naturally: regular visits, shared holidays, the kind of extended family connections that grew organically from genuine affection rather than obligation. Emma extracted a promise from Eli to teach her to carve, while Samuel immediately began planning improvements to his airplane, designed based on techniques he'd observed in the workshop. The photograph Angela had taken would become the first in a New family album, proof that some endings were actually beginnings, that some losses led to discoveries more precious than what had been left behind. As the sun began to set over the fields, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Willa climbed into Tom's new rocking chair beside him, fitting perfectly into the space his arm created. This was the best day ever, she announced with the absolute certainty that only children could muster. And looking around at the faces gathered in the golden light, Tom peaceful in his chair, Angela laughing at something Samuel had said, Jacob, and Eli standing shoulder to shoulder like they'd never been apart, Emma chasing fireflies that were just beginning to appear. Eli had to agree. It was, indeed, the best day ever. The hand-drawn map was carefully folded and tucked into the pages of Eli's Bible, right between Psalms and Proverbs, where he'd be sure to find it often. Willa's artwork showed the path between the two houses in bright crayon strokes, the fence line marked with purple flowers, the barn labeled Samson and Delilah's house in careful block letters, and two stick figures holding hands beside a tree marked Our Special Place. So you won't forget the way to Grandpa Tom's house, she'd explained when she presented it to him that morning, as if the 50 yards between their properties might somehow become an impossible distance to navigate. Now, 3 months later, as the September morning mist rose from fields ready for harvest, Eli smiled as he remembered her earnest expression. The map had become his bookmark, a daily reminder of the summer that had changed everything. The sound of children's laughter drifted across the yard, where Emma and Samuel were helping him feed the chickens during their weekend visit. It had become a regular occurrence, Jacob bringing his family to the farm every other weekend, the children treating the place like a second home they'd always known they belonged to. Grandpa Eli, Martha laid 3 eggs, Emma called out, using the name Willa had given to the most prolific of his hens. The old red hen seemed to preen under the attention, as if she understood her importance in the grand scheme of things. Samuel emerged from the barn carrying Moses, the one-eyed tomcat who had decided that being carried around was his preferred method of transportation when children were present. He missed us, Samuel announced with the certainty of someone who spoke fluent cat. Eli watched his grandchildren with the wonder of a man who had been given an unexpected gift. They came to him so naturally, these small people who shared his blood and Sarah's gentle spirit. Emma had indeed inherited her grandmother's way with animals, while Samuel's gift for building things grew more apparent with each visit to the workshop. Across the yard, Tom sat in his rocking chair on the front porch, his morning coffee steaming in the cool air. His recovery had been steady but slow, and he'd learned to pace himself in ways that chafed against his independent nature. But the chair had become his favorite spot, a place where he could watch the daily rhythm of farm life while keeping an eye on the various projects that seemed to multiply whenever young hands were present. Angela's car appeared in the distance, right on schedule for the weekly pickup that had become as regular as Sunday service. She'd found a job in Columbus that allowed her to work remotely 3 days a week, spending those days at the farm helping her father while maintaining her career in Chicago. It wasn't perfect, but it was working a compromise that honored both duty and dreams. Aunt Angela's here, Emma shouted, though Angela had insisted the children could simply call her by her first name. But Emma had decided that anyone who was family to Willa was family to her, and family deserved proper titles. Willa burst from Angela's car before it had fully stopped, her energy as boundless as ever despite the early hour. She'd grown taller over the summer, her face beginning to lose some of its childish roundness, but her enthusiasm remained unchanged. Mr. Zook. Mr. Zook, she called, running toward him with something clutched in her small hands. Look what came in the mail. It was a letter from Rebecca, his daughter in California, written in response to the carefully crafted note he'd sent 3 weeks earlier. Like Jacob's letter before it, it carried the weight of years and the hope of reconciliation. She wants To come for Christmas, Willa announced, having obviously been filled in on the contents during the drive from town. She says she's sorry it took her so long to write back and that she wants to meet her new family. She paused, her brown eyes serious. That means us, right? We're her new family? Eli looked around at the yard that had once been the domain of one lonely old man and now bustled with the activity of people who belonged to each other. Tom waving from his porch chair, Angela greeting Jacob with the easy familiarity of old friends, Emma and Samuel showing Willa the eggs they'd collected, with the pride of seasoned farmers. Yes, he said, his voice thick with emotion he no longer tried to hide. We're definitely family. As the morning unfolded with its now familiar rhythms, breakfast shared around his kitchen table, plans made for the day's activities, easy chatter of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Eli found himself thinking about the tractor accident that had started it all. How close he'd come to missing this entirely, to dying alone in that field with his grief as his only companion. But Willa had pulled him free, and in doing so had taught him that sometimes salvation came in the smallest packages, wearing pink overalls and carrying endless questions about the world. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the mist and revealing the full splendor of another perfect September day. Eli stood in his doorway, watching his expanded family scatter to their various activities, and felt Sarah's presence as surely as if she was standing beside him. She would have loved this chaos, he knew. She would have delighted in the sound of children's voices in her kitchen, would have insisted on making enough food to feed twice as many people, would have found room in her heart for every person who needed including. Thank you, he whispered, to the morning air, whether to Sarah or God or the mysterious workings of grace that had brought Willa running across a field at exactly the right moment. The friendship bracelet, now faded from months of wear, caught the sunlight on his wrist. Bright colors that had seemed impossibly bold when first tied there, now mellowed into comfortable familiarity. Like love itself, he thought. Startling at first, then settling into something that felt like it had always been there, waiting to be recognized. In his Bible, Willa's map waited between the Psalms of sorrow and the Proverbs of wisdom, marking the place where his heart had learned to beat again. And in his yard, in his workshop, in every corner of his once quiet life, the evidence of love multiplied flourished proof that the best stories didn't end with the end, but with and then the real adventure began.